Walk into a dealership today, and the first thing that hits you is not the machine. It is the price. A Honda CB 650R costs over $1,000 more than it did just a short time ago. The Yamaha MT-07 has quietly climbed the same way. Even the Kawasaki Ninja 400 no longer plays the budget role it once held. In this video, I'll show you what's driving these price jumps, which brands are getting hit next, how the used market is changing, and the smartest moves you can make right now. Miss this, and you won't just overpay, you'll buy at the worst possible time. What makes those price jumps unsettling is not the size. It is the consistency. Look past a single model, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Entry-level machines, once the easiest way in, are drifting upward. Bikes that used to sit comfortably within reach are now pushing into territory that feels heavier on the wallet. That first step into riding is no longer as accessible as it once was. Move into the middleweight range, and the shift sharpens. What used to feel like a logical upgrade now demands hesitation. The numbers no longer align as cleanly with the experience offered. Riders are stretching budgets or stepping back entirely. At the top end, the pressure becomes undeniable. Premium motorcycles, already expensive, are climbing into a different financial category altogether. The kind of purchase that now requires justification, not just desire. And this is the key point. It is not one segment behaving differently. It is all of them moving together. That is what separates this from normal fluctuation. This is not seasonal. It is not temporary. Prices are not correcting, they are resetting. And once that clicks, waiting stops, feeling safe. Because if everything is rising at the same time, then something deeper is driving it. If seeing those real price jumps already makes you question what's actually happening behind the scenes, hit that like button. That's what keeps this channel focused on breaking down real-world cost shifts before they hit your wallet, not after. Now the question becomes unavoidable. What is actually pushing prices in the same direction across the entire market? The answer begins with something called Section 2, 135 tariffs. The name sounds technical, but the idea is simple. A tariff is a tax placed on products that enter the United States from another country. If a motorcycle is built overseas and shipped in, an extra cost can be applied before it ever reaches a dealership. That added cost is not tied to performance, design, or reliability. It exists for one reason only: the bike was built somewhere else. Section 2, 132 is the specific rule that allows this to happen. It gives the government authority to place these added costs on imports when certain national interests are involved. The legal language goes deeper, but for riders, the impact is straightforward. Picture a motorcycle leaving a factory overseas. It is built, assembled, and shipped exactly as intended. Nothing changes about the machine itself. But the moment it enters the United States, an additional charge can be applied. That charge becomes part of the total cost before the bike is ever priced for sale. So the number starts higher from the beginning, and that matters, because pricing does not begin at the showroom floor. It begins long before that, at the point where the product enters the market. When that starting point rises, everything that follows moves with it. This is not limited to one model or one manufacturer. Any motorcycle built outside the country and brought in can be affected. The rule applies broadly, even if the final price differences vary from one brand to another. At its core, this is not complicated. It is an added cost attached to origin. But understanding what it is only answers part of the question. Because policies like this are never created without intent. They are built for a reason, shaped by priorities that go far beyond motorcycles. And once you look at those reasons, the situation becomes much clearer and far more strategic. Now I want to hear from you. Before today, had you actually heard about Section 232 tariffs affecting motorcycles? Or is this your first time connecting the dots? Drop your experience in the comments, because real rider awareness matters more than headlines when decisions start costing money. So why do these tariffs exist at all? At the surface, the answer is protection. Governments use tariffs to give domestic industries room to compete. When imported motorcycles become more expensive, machines built closer to home gain an advantage. Not because they changed, but because the competition did. But that is only part of the picture. There is a deeper layer tied to manufacturing itself. Industries like this are not just about products. They support jobs, supply chains, and long-term investment. By increasing the cost of imports, policies like Section 232 tariffs are designed to push more production inward. The logic is simple. If bringing bikes in becomes more expensive, Building them here starts to make more sense. Then comes stability. Relying heavily on overseas production can create exposure. Supply disruptions, political tension, global slowdowns, these are not theoretical risks anymore. They are realities that have already shown their impact. Strengthening domestic capacity becomes a way to reduce that dependence over time. And this is not unique. Governments across the world use similar strategies, adjusting them based on their own priorities. Sometimes the focus is jobs. Sometimes it is industrial growth. Sometimes it is long-term resilience. The method changes, but the intention stays consistent. Shape the market, influence where things are built, shift the balance. And whether someone agrees with that approach or not is a separate discussion entirely. Because from a rider's perspective, the outcome is what matters. These policies are not random. They are calculated, designed to move industries in a specific direction. But understanding the intention only takes you so far. Because once you follow where these tariffs actually land, geographically, manufacturer by manufacturer, the impact stops being theoretical. It becomes very real, very quickly. Now that the mechanism is clear, the next step is to see where it actually lands. Motorcycles do not appear out of nowhere. They come from specific regions, and that origin matters more than most riders realize. A large share of bikes sold in the United States are built overseas. Japan has long been a primary source, supplying everything from entry-level commuters to performance machines. Europe plays a major role at the premium end. Then there is growing production from countries like India and Thailand, feeding both the lower and middle segments of the market. Different regions, same path. Once a motorcycle is built outside the country and shipped in, it becomes an import. And that is where Section 232 tariffs begin to take effect. Picture the process like a pipeline. A bike leaves a factory overseas, crosses the ocean, and arrives at a United States port. At that moment, before it ever reaches a showroom, an additional cost can be applied. That cost has nothing to do with how the bike performs. It is tied entirely to where it was made. And this is where the scale becomes clear. It does not matter if the motorcycle comes from Japan, Europe, or India. If it enters the country as an import, it moves through the same system, built abroad, brought in, adjusted at the border. Because so many motorcycles follow this exact route, the impact spreads across the entire market. Entry-level bikes, mid-range standards, high-end machines, they are all connected by the same supply chain reality. What makes this especially important is consistency. The pressure is applied at the entry point, meaning every imported motorcycle starts at a higher baseline before it even reaches a dealership. From there, it moves through distributors, dealers, and eventually lands in front of the buyer. So when you look at a price tag, you are not just seeing engineering, materials, and transport. You are seeing geography, you are seeing origin, you are seeing what happened the moment that bike crossed into the country. And once that becomes clear, the next question sharpens quickly. Because if entire regions are tied to this system, what happens to the brands that depend on them? Now the map is clear, but maps do not sell motorcycles. Names do. Because when you step onto a showroom floor, you're not thinking about trade routes or policy decisions. You're looking at badges you trust, machines you have ridden, brands you have followed for years. And this is exactly where the situation stops feeling distant and starts feeling personal. Start with Honda, Yamaha Motor Company, Kawasaki, and Suzuki. These are not niche players. They are the backbone of everyday riding in the United States. Commute bikes, weekend machines, reliable platforms that built their reputation over decades. But beneath that familiarity sits a structure most riders never think about. A large portion of these motorcycles are not built on American soil. They are assembled overseas, then shipped across oceans before ever reaching a dealership. And that distance carries consequences. Look at Royal Enfield. Its rise has been steady, almost quiet, strong value, classic feel, but its production remains rooted abroad. Every unit travels before it arrives. Different identity, same exposure. Now shift upward, Ducati, BMW, Motorrad, premium precise, engineered with a different philosophy. But the underlying path does not change. Built in Europe, delivered into the United States, the segment evolves. The dependency does not. So across the entire market, from entry-level to high-end, one pattern repeats without announcing itself. These brands rely on global production. Build there, sell here. It has always worked efficiently until pressure enters that pipeline. And that is the shift most riders are only beginning to notice, because this is not about brand loyalty. It is about positioning, about which motorcycles sit closest to the point where cost begins to move. You can see who is exposed, but exposure alone does not explain what happens next. At its core, a tariff is not an abstract policy. It is a direct cost applied to every imported motorcycle the moment it enters the United States. Not something hidden in paperwork, something attached to the machine itself. Picture a bike leaving a factory overseas. It is complete, built, tested, ready, but it is not finished with its journey. The moment it arrives at a United States port, a new cost is introduced. Instantly. No delay, no negotiation. That motorcycle now carries a higher financial weight before it has even touched a showroom floor. And that weight does not stay isolated. It moves. The manufacturer or importer absorbs it first. That alone shifts the baseline. The bike is no longer valued at its original production cost. It is already elevated. From there, it flows into distribution, warehousing, logistics, handling. All of it now builds on a more expensive foundation. Then comes the dealership. The dealer is not buying the same motorcycle they were months ago. They are stepping into a higher entry point, and a dealership cannot operate on reduced margins without consequence. Staff, service departments, floor space, inventory risk, those costs do not shrink to compensate. So the adjustment continues forward. By the time that motorcycle reaches you, the tariff is no longer visible as a single line item. It has been carried, reinforced, and embedded into the final number you see. That is why small changes at the import stage rarely feel small in the real world. Not because of complexity, but because of consistency. Every step in the chain reacts to the same increase. Every layer builds on it. And this process does not vary. It does not depend on location, dealer strategy, or timing. If a motorcycle enters through import channels, it follows this exact path, every time. So when prices rise, it is not random. It is structured, predictable, engineered by the system itself. And once that system starts pushing costs upward, every manufacturer faces the same decision. Take the hit or pass it forward. At this point, think about your current bike or the one you're planning to buy. Do you even know where it is built? Let me know in the comments, because that one detail is quietly becoming one of the most important price factors in today's market. Now the lens tightens. The system applies to everyone, but the impact does not land evenly. Each brand carries that pressure differently based on where its motorcycles are built and how they reach the rider. Start with Honda. Scale is its advantage. Production is spread across multiple regions, feeding a lineup that covers everything from first bikes to daily commuters. But that reach comes with a trade-off. A large share of those motorcycles enters the United States through import channels. That means the pressure is not isolated. It is distributed across much of the lineup. Not sudden spikes, steady upward movement, spread across models riders depend on every day. Then comes Yamaha Motor Company. The structure feels familiar, but the character is different. Strong presence in performance-focused categories, naked bikes, sport machines, middleweight platforms that define the riding experience for many. Yet the production backbone still sits overseas. Japan, Southeast Asia. That places a large portion of Yamaha's lineup directly in the same pathway. The result is not limited to one segment. It moves across the range, quietly lifting prices where demand is already strong. Now shift to BMW Motorrad. The starting point changes. These motorcycles enter the market with a premium position, engineered, refined, built with a different expectation, but they still travel, primarily from Europe into the United States. And when costs rise at that level, the effect becomes more visible. Not because the system is different, but because the baseline is higher. Even moderate increases translate into noticeable jumps, especially at the top end. Then there is Royal Enfield, a brand built on accessibility, simplicity, value. Its growth has been driven by offering motorcycles that feel attainable, but its production remains centered abroad. Every unit follows the same route into the United States market, and that creates a direct tension between maintaining affordability and absorbing rising costs. Different brands, different identities, but the same underlying structure. And once that pressure reaches this level, it stops being theoretical, because now every manufacturer faces a decision that directly shapes what you pay next. Because at this stage, the pressure stops being abstract. It turns into a decision every manufacturer has to make, quietly, but with real consequences. Who carries the cost? Because once tariffs enter the system, there is no neutral outcome. That expense has to land somewhere. And in practice, there are only two directions it can go. The first is absorption. This is where a company like Honda or Yamaha Motor Company chooses to hold the line, at least for a while. Prices stay relatively stable. The sticker does not move as much as expected. From the outside, it looks like nothing changed, but something did. The margins tighten, quietly. The space that once allowed flexibility starts to shrink. Incentives become less generous. Inventory becomes more selective. Future updates slow down. The motorcycle stays the same, but the ecosystem around it begins to contract. So the cost is still there. It is just harder to see. The second direction is far more visible, passing it forward. This is where brands like BMW, Motorrad, and Ducati take a different stance. Instead of compressing margins, they protect them. Prices move upward, directly, immediately. The logic is simple: maintain position, preserve structure, and trust that their buyers will accept the shift. And for the customer, that change is impossible to ignore. The same motorcycle, the same features, a different number. Not because the machine evolved, but because the environment around it did. So every brand is balancing the same tension. Hold prices and absorb strain beneath the surface. Raise prices and risk resistance at the point of sale. And that balancing act cannot last forever. Because there is one category that does not play by these rules at all. And that is Harley-Davidson. Not because it avoids pressure entirely, but because it starts from a different position. The difference is simple: where the motorcycle is built. While most global brands depend heavily on overseas production, a large portion of Harley-Davidson's core lineup is assembled within the United States. And under Section 232 tariffs, that changes the equation at a structural level. These tariffs are designed to impact imported materials and finished units. So when a motorcycle is built domestically, it bypasses a significant part of that added cost. That does not make Harley-Davidson immune. Supply chains still stretch across borders. Certain components still move internationally. But compared to brands like Suzuki or Kawasaki, the exposure is reduced, and that reduction creates space. Instead of being forced into constant trade-offs, absorb the cost, or raise the price, Harley-Davidson operates with more stability. Pricing does not need to react as aggressively because the baseline is not shifted as sharply. For the buyer, that difference becomes visible quickly. When imported motorcycles begin to climb, even gradually, consistency starts to feel like value. A bike that holds its price is no longer just steady, it becomes comparatively more attractive. And that subtly reshapes Harley-Davidson's role in the market. It is no longer only about heritage, sound, or identity. It becomes about resilience, about holding position while others adjust. But this is not a new rule, it is an exception. Most manufacturers do not have this level of domestic production to rely on, which means the broader market continues to move under pressure. And once that movement reaches the buyer, something else begins to shift. Because when new bikes rise in cost, demand does not disappear, it redirects. At this point, I want to hear from you. If you are buying right now, would you actually consider a domestically built bike like Harley-Davidson just to avoid these price shifts? Or are you still leaning toward imported brands? No matter what, drop your answer in the comments. And while you are there, subscribe to the channel. Now, let us get back to what really happens when those costs hit the buyer. Once new motorcycle prices begin to rise, the market does not simply absorb the pressure, it redirects it. And the first place that shift becomes visible is the used market. Right now, prices for pre-owned motorcycles are climbing, roughly 10 to 20% across many segments. Not because the bikes suddenly improved, but because the environment around them changed. Start with behavior. As brands like Honda, Yamaha Motor Company, and Kawasaki begin adjusting prices upward, new motorcycles start drifting out of reach for a portion of buyers. Not everyone is willing to stretch their budget to cover increases that have nothing to do with performance or features. So they pivot. Instead of buying new, they step into the used market. Slightly older bikes, lower entry cost, familiar value. But that shift does not happen quietly. It happens all at once. More buyers enter the same space, chasing a supply that cannot expand overnight. Unlike manufacturers, the used market cannot produce inventory on demand. The number of clean, well-maintained motorcycles available at any given time is limited, so pressure builds. And when demand rises faster than supply can respond, prices follow. But what makes this moment different is speed. This is not a gradual seasonal increase, it is compressed. Tariff-driven changes on new motorcycles have pushed a wave of buyers into the used market in a short window. The result is sharper, more aggressive movement than riders are used to seeing. Prices climb faster, competition tightens, options shrink, and importantly, none of this is driven by the motorcycles themselves. A 3-year-old bike has not become better overnight. Its value has not evolved. Only the context has. And that is where things start to break down. Because when prices move this quickly, they do not move evenly. Some bikes rise with the market, others overshoot entirely. And telling the difference between those two is where the real challenge begins. When the market moves this fast, the real danger is not the higher price. It is the illusion of value. Because once costs begin rising across the board, clarity fades. Everything starts to look justified. Listings that would have felt overpriced not long ago now seem reasonable, simply because the baseline has shifted. And that is where most buyers lose control, not when they pay, but when they evaluate. Because not every motorcycle is becoming expensive for the same reason. Some are rising because riders genuinely want them. Proven machines, reliable platforms, bikes that hold attention even when availability tightens. Others are simply being carried upward by momentum, lifted by overall pressure without earning that increase on their own. And if you cannot separate the two, you are not just paying more. You are paying without precision. That distinction begins with time. In a stable market, depreciation follows a clear pattern. The steepest drop happens early, then value settles into a slower decline. But that rhythm is being disrupted. You will now find relatively recent bikes sitting close to their original price, not because they held value naturally, but because demand is compressing that curve. That compression is not subtle. It is a warning. Then comes usage. Mileage still matters, but it no longer tells the full story. A lightly ridden bike in a high-demand category can command a premium far beyond what its usage suggests. Meanwhile, a higher mileage machine outside current trends may remain grounded. So the better question is not how little it has been used, but whether demand is inflating what it should be worth. Then comes comparison. Step back, look across multiple listings, and patterns begin to form. And once you see those patterns clearly, one question takes over. What move puts you ahead of this market, not behind it? Once you can clearly separate inflated pricing from grounded value, the conversation changes. It stops being about understanding the environment and starts becoming about how you move within it. That is where the first two smart decisions begin to take shape. The first is simple on the surface, but often misunderstood: buying used with intention. Because despite the pressure across the market, not every used motorcycle has been pulled upward equally. The distortion is uneven, and inside that unevenness, opportunity still exists, but it requires a shift in focus. Instead of chasing what everyone else is chasing, you step slightly outside that pressure. Not toward outdated machines, but toward models that have moved past peak attention. Bikes that are a few years removed from release, with reasonable mileage and a history that speaks for itself, not for hype. These motorcycles tend to follow a more stable value pattern. They are not being aggressively bid up by buyers looking for something that feels almost new. They exist in a quieter space, where pricing still reflects condition and usage more than urgency. Less attention, more stability. The second path moves in a different direction entirely, not within the used market, but around the source of the pressure itself. This is where Harley-Davidson becomes relevant again, not as a preference, but as a position. With much of its production rooted in the United States, it operates with less direct exposure to import-related cost increases. And that creates something increasingly rare right now: consistency. While imported motorcycles continue adjusting to shifting costs, pricing here tends to move with more control, less reaction. So this is not about choosing one type of bike over another. It is about positioning yourself away from the strongest pressure points. One approach steps sideways into quieter parts of the market. The other steps around the source entirely. Two different paths, built on the same principle: avoid unnecessary exposure. But even that is not the full picture. Because in a market like this, when you act can quietly matter just as much as what you choose. And if you want to go deeper and support the channel, consider becoming a member. You will get early access to upcoming videos before the market shifts again. And the final piece is not the motorcycle itself, it is timing. Because even in a stable environment, pricing follows a rhythm. And right now, that rhythm is amplifying everything already in motion. Motorcycles are seasonal by nature. As winter fades and spring begins, activity returns. Riders come back, new buyers step in, and dealerships see a steady rise in attention. By the time early summer settles in, that activity reaches its peak. And when demand peaks, pricing follows closely behind. This is not theory, it is behavior. More buyers enter the market at the same time, more are willing to meet asking prices, and sellers gain confidence. Listings move faster, negotiation tightens, Even average condition bikes begin to command stronger numbers simply because timing shifts the balance. Now place that on top of current pressure. Higher new bike costs are already pushing buyers toward used options. That alone increases competition. But when seasonal demand arrives, it does not just add volume, it concentrates it. And concentration creates intensity. A motorcycle that feels slightly elevated in price early on can become noticeably more expensive in a short window. Not because the machine changed, but because the number of buyers did. That is where timing becomes leverage. Entering the market before demand peaks places you in a different position entirely. Fewer competitors, more flexibility, sellers who are still willing to adjust. It is a quiet advantage, but a real one. Because instead of reacting to pressure, you are moving ahead of it. And in a year like this, that difference is not minor, it is decisive. But even with the right move and the right moment, one factor remains uncertain, because this market is still evolving. And what happens next will determine whether pressure stabilizes or accelerates. And the question is no longer just what is happening now, it is what comes next. And the honest answer is simple. The market is still moving. There is a strong chance prices continue to rise through the rest of the year, but not in a straight line. Some increases will come directly from policy pressure. Others will arrive later through reduced supply, tighter dealer inventory, and sustained demand in the used space. These shifts do not correct quickly. They unfold over time. At the same time, uncertainty remains. Policies can change. Adjustments can happen. But that uncertainty rarely pushes prices down. It usually creates caution. And caution tends to lean upward. So expecting a clear drop is unrealistic. What matters instead is positioning. Not chasing the perfect deal, but avoiding the worst exposure. Acting early if you are already planning. Staying focused on real value. Walking away when pricing loses logic. Because once you understand the direction of pressure, everything changes. You are no longer reacting. You are navigating. And that is where the advantage becomes real. So do not stop here. The next video goes even deeper into the machines that actually hold their value when the market turns against you. Click the next video and keep the ride going. Subscribe to join the tribe. And if you want early access before everyone else catches on, become a member and do not forget, like this video.